Hello and welcome to It's a Numbers Game. I'm Adam Morris, flying solo on the mic today whilst Daniel takes a well-earned breather. My guest is Ian from SquareDot, a brand positioning pro who helps MSPs escape the "we're just another IT provider" trap. Stay with us and you'll learn the segment target position framework that shows you exactly which prospects to chase and which to ignore. How to mine your own customers for golden sound bites that turn into compelling, credible marketing copy, and real differentiation in action, from projects on time on budget guarantees to concierge-style service models you can steal. If you're ready to give buyers a reason to choose you and to remember you, let's dive in. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam.
Great to have you on the podcast today. And I'm particularly excited and intrigued about having a discussion with you around the whole differentiation piece for MSPs, because this is something that we keep hitting time and time again. You know, MSPs, it's not the only industry. There's lots of others like accounting and legal, etc., where service industries in particular struggle to show how they're different, to show what they are good at, what's unique about them, how they differentiate. And of course, it's vital to kind of carve this out in some way in the marketplace. Otherwise, you're just one of thousands out there.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested to hear about this topic and dig into it. So perhaps, Ian, you could just kick things off with some thoughts around this subject, and we can start to dig a bit deeper.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably not a bad place to start, Adam, is because you mentioned some other professional services industries like accounting, legal, and if you take the MSP space, and the reason one of the reasons they all struggle with differentiation is that they tend to be led by logical thinkers, and in the MSP space, that's great for problem solving, implementing hyperconverged infrastructure, and mission critical security services. But when it comes to differentiating your business, it can be this presents a challenge. I heard an interesting story recently, actually talking of logic, and it was about a restaurant owner in New York. He owned a restaurant called 11 Madison Avenue, I think they were called. And they became 50 on a list of the best restaurants in wherever. It was, an important list to this guy, and what he wanted to move up the list. And he decided to bring his staff to the restaurant that came first. So they all went to another restaurant in New York and to the restaurant that came first. And they were all sitting around and reveling at the things that this restaurant did well. And he told them all to stop. And he said, I don't want you to find out what this restaurant does well. I want you to figure out what they don't do well. And they discovered that what they didn't do well was they didn't do beer well. The people who drank beer were made feel a little bit like second-class citizens. And, there were two beers, and it was all about the wine drinkers, essentially. And the other thing they didn't do was coffee. And so he went away and he said, okay, I want us to double down on beer and coffee, because we can do everything they did well, maybe not as well as them, but we're kind of nearly there. But let's over-index on what they did poorly. And lo and behold, 12 months later, they came first. And it's a great story, I think, to demonstrate the problem with logical thinking. Logical thinking is, it leads you to the same place as your competitors, because they're all thinking the exact same way. And I thought this was a really interesting story to highlight that. The guy's written a book on it. I think it's called Unreasonable Hospitality. But yeah, I think that's where the MSPs are, is that they're, 90% of people, 95% of people who work in the space are all logical. They're all copying each other. They're all reading off the Microsoft, IBM, VMware, our Broadcom, as they are now, rule book and our playbook. And that's how they all end up in the same place. And I suppose that probably brings us on nicely to differentiation.
Well, and I was just going to say 100% can understand what you've been saying around the whole logical thinking bit. Absolutely. That's the way I think, I guess that's why I became an IT engineer. I liked the certainty, the structure, and when I realized I had to do more than that to grow a business, I had to think about selling and marketing, and I had to, people had to know I existed, and then they had to know I was actually quite good at things. It was head scratching time, and took a lot of work to get my head around it all. And the differentiation piece was just so really hard, for me, probably for others out there. Well, hang on a minute. We can only recruit the same talent. We're recruiting the same engineers from the same talent pool. We're working with the same vendors like Microsoft. What's different there? There's nothing different there. We're buying the same PCs from Dell and HP. What's different there? I don't know how we're different. So where do you start on this, Ian? Where should an MSP owner start on this?
Yeah. So there's a thing in marketing. There's a famous marketing professor called Mark Risson, who's I think he's from Hull in England and now lives in Australia. Any marketing people will know him, and he calls the Holy Trinity of marketing. So it begins with segmentation, moves on to targeting, and then positioning. And segmentation is segment of the market you play in. The targeting is the companies within that segment that you believe you should target, and then positioning. And within positioning, he talks about 3 C's essentially, which is the customer, the competitor, and the customer, the competitor, and the company, you. So essentially, it's not a bad kind of Venn diagram to think about, which is what you're really good at, what does the competition do, and then what does the customer want, right? Now, your listeners are probably saying, well, if I was to answer what the competitors do, what do we do? It's still the same. But having worked with so many MSPs, you'd be amazed how different they all are. And the difference really comes down to how you do things. So at one end of the spectrum, and I suppose I'll create a notional spectrum for the purposes of this, but one end of the spectrum, you could have a kind of, what I describe as a pure play MSP, trouble ticket raising, or trouble ticket answering managed service provider that's just, processing issues that their customers have, right? And they might have hundreds of customers, and they're solving hundreds of, small technical problems. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you might have a company who does 40 million pounds or euros in business that has 15 customers, and they've deep subject matter expertise in infrastructure, for example. And as a consequence of that, they have a really good ability to do cyber recovery as distinct from cyber security. So both of those two businesses, to the man on the street, are MSPs or IT service providers, but they provide different services and in a very different way. And that the work that we do is we get under the skin of the business by understanding their heritage, where they came from, where they want to be in the next 3 or 5 years, what their customers say about them, what their employees say about them. And that uncovers insights. And we use those insights to develop positioning and messaging that is true to them, different from their target market, and really appealing to the buyer. Because the buyer doesn't buy. That's the other thing that is problematic within the space, is that, and I suppose everyone in every company is guilty of it. When you start in a business, very soon you become oriented towards the business, and you're no longer market oriented. But really, it's about sitting in the shoes, or trying to sit in the shoes of your buyer. So, what are their pain points? What are they trying to achieve? What jobs are they trying to get done, and what are they buying? In many respects, well, some people would say that B2B buyers are logical. They're actually more emotional than B2C buyers, because their jobs are on the line. Their reputation in front of their colleagues is on the line. They want to carry shoulder height through the office, if they're enthusiastic about their careers, etc. So that's what you're playing to in a lot of respects.
And we'll come back to the differentiation piece a bit more in a moment. But let's just dig into the segment side of it. What was the M that you used to describe that?
Segmentation.
Or was that market? Was that
Segmentation.
three?
The three C's: customer,
Sorry,
customer competition,
customer,
and company.
Yeah. So we're talking about defining a segment. And in your example earlier, you talked about an MSP with hundreds of customers, across several segments. And then you talked about one with perhaps just 14 or 15 in one segment that you had deep knowledge around. So just expand a little bit more about that for me, how that starts to come together.
So yeah, it's essentially the reason you do it is to inform choices, because we don't have unlimited budgets or unlimited resources to target, everybody. So even within, small markets, it's still really important to kind of focus your energy and efforts on a certain target within a segment. So the segment could be a good example of a segment is, SMEs, between 10 and 200 employees, right? Or it might be, mid-market that have between, I know we're probably talking predominantly to a UK audience, so your definition of SME is very different to ours in Ireland. But in terms of numbers, But then if you take that SME segment, right, there'll be, a huge amount of customers, potential customers within that, what did I say, 50 to 200 or 10 to 200 employees, right? So what you're looking for is a targeting within that segment. So you pick your segments, they were really strong in this particular SME space, but then you move to targeting. And the targeting is, well, who within that are most likely to buy our products? Who within that segmentation can we be really intensely appealing to? And that's informed by who you sold to in the past, the value you bring, the profitability of the existing customers you have. And there's various criteria you can use to make those choices. But that then informs, the positioning and messaging, because you can, hone in you can become very focused on that particular target. It might be a particular vertical or a particular number of employees. It might be by pain point. It might be, let's say, you pick the small financial companies with between 50 and 200 employees because they're heavily regulated with DORA and NIS2, and you feel that you have a very strong proposition in that respect, So that's I don't know, does that answer?
Of course, yeah. And when does the target market hit the sweet spot? In other words, when is it defined appropriately? It's not too big. It's not too it's not too small that isn't enough business there potentially.
Yeah.
How do you go about determining that kind of sweet spot of specificness in defining that target market?
That would come from the value that you would put on it. So it depends on what your goals are. That's usually a very good place to start. So how much do we want to grow by in whatever period? And then and you figure out what the targeting is, or you pick a particular target, and if it isn't big enough to achieve, you don't believe it's big enough to achieve the goal that you have, you can broaden it, and and there is spillover. It's not too difficult to find. You could go from just having financial, services. You could go, you could include banking, insurance, and pensions in it, for example. So you just builds it out, but it all comes down to what value you think is in that market, how many, and then go back to your numbers, how many sales qualified leads you need to engage with those, to engage with, to get your conversions to make those sales. Yeah.
And of course, it ties into the value proposition that you have for that market and what capacity and skills you have, right?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So you want to be making sure you've done both sides of the equation, right? You've worked out what is a good market, because the size is there. They've got budgets. They're not going to be swamped by AI in the next 6 months and disappear, whatever it is. Plus, you have the skill sets to provide those services that they want.
Exactly. And the case studies to back it up. So that, that's why you would use your existing customer base and, to inform that targeting decision. Because what you want to be able to do then is build as many case studies as possible within.
So what would you say to the question that owners might have out there today listening to this, where they're saying, well, hang on a minute, do you know what? We've looked at this in the past. We've got 50 customers. Some are in service industries, some are in manufacturing, some are in logistics. You know, we've got a jewelry maker, a candlestick maker, you know, a plumber, and everything in between. You know, the max we've got of any one sector is 3. I'm not convinced it's necessarily the right sector we want to be in. What would you say to someone who's trying to kind of get better at this segmentation?
Well, it doesn't.
And they're not sure where to go.
Yeah, and this is the problem, I suppose. People tend to jump straight to verticals, and if you think of the example you just gave there, if you have an MSP that has that serves many different verticals, when they look at their database of customers, there will be things that bubble to the surface, and it might be pain points that their buyer experiences. It might be the company size, it might be a location, and that's really what will inform. They'll have a sense of where when the sales conversations happen, do they feel this is a sale that they're going to get over the line? Are the people they're talking to leaning into the examples of the problems they've solved in the past? And that's a really good indication to prompt them in direction of where the targeting is going.
Do you think, I'm not sure what term to use for this, but the culture or the sort of, for example, a family-owned business is different to a non-family-owned business in terms of how they run it. Certainly on the smaller side, there might be some connections around the culture of that business that match in terms of you as an MSP. Are there some sort of connections there or some differences there that can work in terms of segmenting?
Absolutely. If, for example, are you suggesting that there could be you might over-index on family-owned businesses because you're a family-owned business yourself and you?
Yeah, exactly. Just different ways of seeing what clicks. Exactly. In terms of trying to stand out. That was just a thought that came into my head. But if it's not segmented, if it's not geography, and it's not technology, and it's not size, pain point. What are the pain points?
Yeah.
Or what are some of the other areas that you could sort of look at that perhaps haven't traditionally been looked at?
Yes. Yeah. That's certainly worth looking at. All right. Yeah. But in the examples of the companies that we worked with, they'll typically be, on the companies with the smaller number of customers and bigger deal sizes will tend to focus on a particular vertical. It might be, or it could be just enterprise. There's probably only 10,000 large enterprises in Ireland, so an MSP that specializes in those, doesn't really have to differentiate by segment. But then when you go down to the other end, the SPE end, it typically, we have a project at the moment, and where the soft center seems to be is in businesses that rely heavily on technology. So looking at kind of, media companies, cyber companies, those types. They're a telco provider as well, this example I'm giving,
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what we're saying is get deeply immersed into a particular type of business, whether it's sector-based or something else around their pain points, and truly understand what the owners and the leadership team are going through, really understanding what their problems are, what's happening in the market, what the opportunities look like. And then you can start to build your services to offer value in that sector and start to use their language and everything else.
But it's about positioning your services and how you do things that appeals to them. That's the key. That's where this big, I suppose, opportunity exists within the MSP space, is that getting the answers to those informs that positioning and messaging. So you show up and you're not talking about being the digital transformation partner or the cloud partner or the, name the list of things that they call themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, not the trick. This isn't the trick, but of course, a lot of those services are the same, right?
Yeah.
So MSPA can be delivering Microsoft 365 services in exactly the same way that MSPB is. But what we're talking about here is communicating the value of that in a way that resonates with that particular sector, the impact that can make to their business.
Yeah.
If even though perhaps the underlying technology itself is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree with that.
If I could give, would it help? Yeah, a good example that I can give, which they're a Microsoft partner, a client of ours, and they serve the enterprise space in the UK and Ireland. And the insight that we gathered from them, from looking at what they do and talking to their potential customers and customers, is that in the IT space, projects typically go over time, over budget, or aren't delivered at all. But this particular client over-indexed against that, so they delivered projects on time, on budget, and this was something that was an insight that really came through. So we leaned into that, and there became around delivering impact. So everything on their messaging on their website is all around the delivery of impact, and all about uptimes and the speed with which they do things and how they live up to those promises. And going back to what I said earlier about how they do things. So that was they were the other insights that we gathered, that they were very kind of craftsman-like in their approach to the work that they did. And again, we leaned into that. So that's a very good example of taking the insight, taking what's true to the MSP, and creating a differentiation based on that.
And what would you say to the idea that ideally you want to differentiate so much so that you repel part of the market?
Well, that's ideally what you want to do. And that comes down, like, if every sales conversation you have is with your ideal prospect, like, it very quickly reduces the cost of acquisition, increases customer lifetime value. It's just that the sales cycles are much shorter. So yeah, that's you want to repel people. You don't want to be talking to people who you can't really serve that well, for sure.
Yeah, for me, that was kind of one of the first fundamental lessons to learn, was that you don't want to work for everybody. Everybody is not your customer.
Yeah.
You do want to be choosy, and you do want to carve out a niche and be really clear on who you want to work with.
Exactly.
That was just a really huge lesson. And of course, in setting out that clarity and repelling others that aren't going to be a fit, it makes you a much stronger fit for those that see themselves as a fit for you, doesn't it?
Big time. And I even noticed myself I do all of our selling. So because we've such a heritage in the MSP space, when I sit down with the CEO of an MSP that turns over between 10 and 200 million a year, they're all ears. They want to hear all of, how we did it for this company and that company, because in most cases they know, I don't know of them or know them, and they've seen the results and they're really interested, for sure. Yeah.
So you gave us a great example there around project delivery and that business really stressing their expertise around how they manage their projects and how they manage budgets. Could you give us perhaps a couple of other examples of clients you've worked with that you've helped identify, and how you've helped identify something that's different about them, and how they've then turned that into a new value proposition?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the most recent ones we did was for a client in the Midlands in Ireland, and they are Microsoft HPE partner. And one of the insights that we uncovered from talking to them and to their customers was the personal approach that they take to providing service for their customers. So to the point where every customer has the CEO's mobile phone number. They know a lot of the people in the organization, and vice versa, so there's a large relationship building. And also they took great pride in appreciating the risks that CIOs take, that they're making huge investments on behalf of their organization. They're going to their CEO to get sign off on £500,000 or euros. So, that was something else that came through, that there was a lot of empathy in this organization. So that was the insight, and what the outcome of that was for this particular company. IT is personal. And if you look at, like, it didn't just inform the positioning and the messaging, but how they show up in the market is, we took inspiration from concierge services and private banks as opposed to other IT or managed service providers. Now, if they don't look, exactly like a private bank, you need to kind of be true to the category and also lean into this differentiation. But it's a good example. And we've kind of developed that further by promoting the fact that, that personal connection, the mobile phone number of the CEO, they're just small examples. But again, everything that we do then thereafter is informed by this personal approach, whether it's a direct mail campaign or an invitation to an event. It's all done in a personal way where you're kind of living the brand, or we're encouraging the client to live the brand in everything that they do.
And was that the strapline to the business? Did you say to us it's personal? Was that what you said?
Yeah, for us, IT is personal. It's
for us, IT is personal.
Cutting edge technology with traditional values.
Okay, and that was kind of the tagline around what they did.
Exactly.
Just my cynical nature here. Was there any kind of kickback around that, in as much as this is often sort of put out there amongst, big corporates, and they talk about the personal touch all the time, don't they? And yet, you go to a call center and have to wait for 30 minutes before it gets answered by some robot. So how did they ensure they didn't fall into that kind of trap and genuinely lived that brand?
Well, it's an interesting question you ask. It has to be true. So there's no point in saying these things or making these claims if they're not true. So it wasn't a stretch for them because we got that from the customers, that there was this personal, empathetic approach from this particular client. So we were able to take that as a truth. And, whereas if these things are decided in a boardroom somewhere and say, oh, let's be personal, and, it's not coming from the soul of the company. It's coming from a room somewhere where someone decides it. So yeah, it's really important for it to be true. And this goes back to my point earlier on, it is really interesting how different all of these MSPs are. There is differentiation, but it takes a lot of work, inner reflection, and to kind of, figure out what it is. And that's why there are brand positioning experts. That their job is to uncover these insights, to be able to, and then when you show it to the client, they kind of, they exhale and they go, yeah, that is it. Or they might have been resisting something that they knew was true all along, and they lean into it. You give them the courage to lean into what they always thought they should lean into, and that's another example we have of a client where we convinced them to embrace infrastructure. And as a result, everything about their brand is about infrastructure, because they are deep subject matter experts in the infrastructure space. And they're one of these MSPs that is a small number of very valuable customers, and they do massive projects for them.
Got it. Well, look, we've run out of time as always, and there's always loads to talk about, masses to talk about. Something just clicked in my head when you were talking about canvassing the clients. I think for me, that's absolutely a key part of this process. Talk to your clients, ask them what they think of you, what do they like about you, what don't they like about you perhaps, but what do they think of you when they first think of you? What is it that, how do you stand out? I think there's a lot to be gained in just doing that, because sometimes you kind of assume what you think this thing is, and actually if you ask your clients, and the words they use often helps you truly sort of get to grips with that difference, especially if you're asking them, well, how are we different from the guys you had before? And those sorts of things. Look, we've run out of time, Ian, but any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just one, and it was when you said the word, what do they think of you, right? So a big thing about positioning is to occupy a place in the mind of your buyer, so your existing customers will know you, right? But for people who don't know you, we all have these ladders in our minds when it comes to whatever we want to buy, whether it be a car or a TV or a pair of sports shoes, whatever. You have this brand ladder in your mind, and the reason why, or one of the reasons you do brand positioning, is to have something that's, as I say, true to you, different from the competition, and appealing to the target audience. So it creates a memory of you with the buyer. And if you're the same as everybody else, they'll never remember you. But if you're differentiated and distinct and you have something for them to remember you by, you'll just get a hell of a lot more inquiries when those people come to make a decision about whatever it is that you're selling.
Indeed. Well, look, thank you again. And if anybody wants to follow up with you, Ian, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Best is email is ian@squaredoff.agency, and LinkedIn handle is, I just got it for you now.
We'll put that on our show notes anyway, Ian. That's fine.
Okay.
So that's great. Speak to you again soon, Ian.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Adam. Thank you.